For whoever wasn't here when we started, we're going to review this, the theme that we wrote down months ago. No matter what happened this week, we choose love. No matter what happens next week, okay. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the word for love in there is ahava. It's not a particularly exciting word. It's sort of broad. In English, we say, I love you, and it can mean a lot of different things. I love pizza. I love the Cowboys. That's bad. That's bad this year. I love my wife. Hopefully not in that order of those things, but English and Hebrew, it's just this one big word. If you've been in church for very long, you've probably heard a sermon that in the New Testament, in Greek, there are 4 different words around love that really separate out all those different things. So there's this one, storge. I love pizza, especially when, there's some good pizza out there. There's phileo. I love you, man. Kind of like a bro hug, kind of I love you, phileo. Like Philadelphia comes from that one. There's eros, where I'm kind of feeling in love with someone. That's eros, erotic, all that. And then there's another word that Paul uses in the story, the scripture that Jane read. That's agape. That's a different kind of love. And that same with the Hebrew. It means this also. So sometimes when you read 1 Corinthians, how many people got married with that verse? Anybody here? A few hands could come up for that. Yeah. You get married to that verse, and it feels really connected to the love that you're feeling, because it should feel that way. But the word he's using there is agape. And agape sort of means the sensibility behind it. It carries this assumption that the whole world is just tied together by this thing called love. Or we can back at it and do it from the other side. Whatever it is that holds the whole world together, the ideas, the feelings, the stuff, the hopes, the dreams, the fears, it's love. That's the thing that holds it together. It's the thread by which the Spirit kind of weaves itself through all things. So agape, for us in our life, it's the glue that holds us together. And when we participate in agape, in love, that's a holy thing. There's nothing more beautiful than to watch love embodied out in the world. So for Paul, he's writing this. He's using this word over and over. Love is kind, love is this, love is that. He's writing it. It's not to a couple. He's writing to a really messy church. This is not a messy church right now. We're doing pretty good. But some of us have been in churches that are split over something. The color of the carpet, oh, that'll split some people. The songs we sing, that'll split a church pretty good. The last 10 years of politics, that'll split a church pretty good. So Paul's writing to a church that's split over the hot button issues of their time. Things like what to serve at the potluck, and what counts as okay sex, and what counts as that shouldn't be sex, who belongs in the circle, who doesn't belong in the circle. They just had all those kind of arguments, and they fought about it. And for them, their church, it looks in some ways a lot like America today. They were split in a lot of ways, and they needed the reminder. They did not need a reminder to be kind to each other. They did not need a reminder to listen to each other's perspective. They did not need a reminder to find common ground. They needed the reminder in this time of crisis that at the root of all things, and all controversy, and all joy and all pain, at the center of all beauty and fear, at the ground of fulfillment and loss, love holds it all together. Love holds us together. And so what Paul is writing to them is, no matter what happens, we choose love. Now, I was gone last week mostly to officiate a wedding on a beach. I went to what is like my favorite place in the whole world to other than the wedding, to rock climb and do my favorite thing in the whole world with some great people. It was a great time. And what I said to open that service, and what I say at every wedding ceremony, it has to do with agape love. This is what I say. And if I'm doing any of your weddings at some point, this is what I'll say for you too. I say that this sacred union is rooted in the very order of creation itself, so that the height of human flourishing, the very best that we are meant to be, is when two people pledge themselves and true love is reflected through them. And I believe that. I say it at the beginning of a service because I believe it. I believe that love is more than romantic. I choose a love that is more than religious. I choose a love that says, this is the way the world is, this is the way the world should be. I choose love because no matter what happens, I need that. But something did happen this week, and when something like this happens, part of me pauses. I'm sure we've gone through this whole litany of emotions. Part of me is desperate for answers. I want guidance. I want a 5-point plan. I want steps. I want to know, well, what did you do to get through it? How can we get through it? What can we do to lift our spirits? Part of me, I am a Bible nerd. I mean, I'm the biggest Bible nerd in this group, but part of me wants to say, in response to what happens in culture today, who cares about a 2,000, 3,000-year-old book? I mean, church, I heard a comedian say that the worst book club in the world is church because we picked one book 3,000 years ago and we just can't get through it. We can't finish it. It's still going. So part of me feels so disoriented by life that what possibly could the Bible say to that? And I thought about just skipping all that nonsense about the Greek thing, but that was just a warm-up to get you all in place. Because actually the Bible, the story of the Bible, the story that lifts up ahava and agape, what's it about? It's not about heaven. It's certainly not about heaven. I'm sorry for those of you who think that, but it is not at all about what happens when we die. Even if there are stories in there that ask that question and give some ideas and tell stories, all that. The story of the Bible is not about that. It's not about what you should do here in life. It's not about morality, even though most of you, when you got out of Sunday school, when you were like 16 years old, and finally your parents let you stop going to Sunday school, if I asked you what's it about, you would say, doing good stuff or something like that. It's not about that. It's not about, history. A lot of people want that book to be about history. Good Lord, it's not about that. People want it to be about science. No, by a lot. It's not about the religious beliefs that have split churches forever. It's hard to find those in there at all. The story of the Bible that's told over and over, you just flip it open, find a page, it's in there. The story of the Bible that's told over and over is about how God's people can deal with the brokenness of the world. That's the story. That's why it matters still, even when it is really hard to get into it. The brokenness there can happen in our own lives through grief and loneliness and anxiety and confusion and doubt. Sure. Every page, there's something about that. And that brokenness often comes from a society or from particular leaders who have torn love apart for the thousands of years of writers and stories in that book. And some of the biggest names, you think these people are heroes, and in some way they are, but they're all a little broken and they've all hurt people. Noah, kind of a drunk who was a terrible dad. Saul, David, Solomon. There's an endless array of these terrible kings and judges and Caesars, people like Samson. How many of you grew up thinking Samson was some great guy? Terrible guy, terrible leader. Jezebel, Nero, Nebuchadnezzar. Some of these leaders, and this is kind of hard to swallow, this is why I want to say this is some relevant book for these days. Some of the worst leaders in the Bible were chosen by biblical, faithful people. Some of the worst, some of the most painful, some of the most aggressive and cruel. The people said, give us a king. And the smart people were like, no, not that. And they said, yeah, we want that. And God is like, oh, God, finally. Okay, fine. Many of the worst leaders in the Bible were chosen by people who were certain that God blessed that choice. And they just held on to that belief even as they suffered and just hurt their neighbors. For example, like David, King David. I mean, he even gets this, one of the writers says, that's a man after God's heart. King David gets, praised even after hiding sexual assault, sort of painted off on the side. People caught him. He just paid off the sexual assault on the side and let it go and just let it slide. You wonder, why couldn't they see all of his failures? Others are reviled for stealing from the poor to give to the rich. And you think, well, at least the prophets held that truth up there and said, this is not right. Some leaders are criticized for oppressing foreigners. Other leaders are kind of championed for proving their strength through cruelty. And when you read through it enough, you start to realize that our distinction between kind of Fox News and real news, it's as old as time. The Bible describes it endlessly, that there are people who are seeing through completely different lenses. And I think we learn as much about God and God's people by seeing that distinction. Through it all, the Bible is a story about how to regain your ground in the face of all the brokenness and evil. Because some of these people who needed to regain their ground, some of them followed these tyrants. Other times when they saw it, they ran and they hid. Once in a while, they fought back. Once in a while, they fought back in ways that God would not have wanted. Most of all, the people of God found ways to just live their lives well and to try to mend the brokenness around them, while trusting that their neighbors and God keeps making slow steps to a deeper justice. At their best, they stood up to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly in ways that transform their souls, even when their actions did not transform their world around them as fast as they wanted. But through it all, the Bible is a story about how to regain your ground in the face of such chaos. It's a story, so much of it is about remembering these deepest values and envisioning a better kingdom and practicing the soul work that helps you to embody that now and in crisis. That's not morality, that's not Sunday school, that is practicing the soul work that we're all called to do. It's a difficult story about no matter what happens, we choose love. Every page about the heartbroken, the marginalized, those who are mourning, the left out, the lonely, the lost. In their time, hundreds and thousands of years ago, in our time, this week and all along, God's people are any of those and all of us who struggle with those difficulties of life. And that absolutely includes the struggles we put on ourselves with anger and addiction. And it's absolutely those struggles that land on us because of despots and systems. Now, at some point, Jesus stepped into the story of God's people in a particular time, in a particular place, to stand against a particular group of Make Israel Great Again jokers. But by doing that, he's standing against all threats to love, then and now, external, internal. He chooses the word kingdom. He could have called this anything. I think it's a silly idea to call, the best that God has a kingdom. That's a political word. I'm sure when Jesus got started, he's way younger than me, so a little wet behind the ears, he's starting to call it kingdom, and people said, Jesus, don't preach about politics. But he said, what I'm aiming for is a kingdom that's so much better than any of the nonsense we have today. I'm not interested in fixing the chaos of political kingdoms. I'm interested in deeper healing through community. And so he stood up against their authorized abuse in such a dramatic way that no one could have conceived of what he did on the cross. The cross was such an incredibly disgusting display that for him to use that somehow to show peace, it was mind-blowing. His death, even his resurrection, it didn't fix anything. The cross didn't solve any problems. The orphans were still orphans. The widows were still endangered. People were still hurting. Foreigners were still pressed away. It didn't accomplish anything except, over time, to lead people to new life within their circumstances, on their own crosses. They weren't alone. Jesus led people in life and in death to heal their broken hearts from within their awful situations. Now, if we're following Jesus at all, we're not called to hang on a cross, literally, figuratively. We might be called to do something as creative, to subvert the authorities. We're not called to hand ourselves over in any way to fight against the Christian nationalists, our Pontius Pilates of the time. But we are called to stand up to those forces of cruelty and judgment and revenge that Jesus faced, and that we can face these in Costco on a regular day. We can face these on the news, on special weeks. We're called to stand up to that. Stand up to the tormentors of our time with a holy vision, something that inspires our imaginations, something that leads us towards subversive love. No matter what new terrors are invented in our time that Jesus could not have considered, we choose love. The early church chose love, and soon after Jesus' time, they had this vision. They stood up against despair by creating a network of food pantries to support the most vulnerable people among them, which at that time was widows. This day and age, widows are not the most vulnerable thing, so in the face of great evil, I don't think that's what we're called to do. But later, those very same widows, they stood up against this oppression of hopelessness by creating the first world's hospitals. Christians did that. Very early on, they were inspired by trying something new, and people were sick, and they said, we're going to make a hospital. Women did that. You tick the clock a few centuries further, they stood up to ignorance. They were just surrounded by ignorance. We can't imagine what that's like. They said, we're surrounded by ignorance. We are going to create universities. We're going to make that happen. The world, we hear about the dark ages, and maybe, I don't know how boring life was. It seemed mundane. They said, in the face of this mundane life, we're going to create beauty. We're going to make cathedrals all over Europe. We're going to write music that's inspirational. Once dogma got so settled and stuck, and people felt just like church was chewing on crackers or something. It just felt terrible, and they said, we're gonna lift up a new sensibility. And so people like Martin Luther and John Calvin came in. The world got stuck where there was authority, where all these priests were in charge, and the people just listened. They said, we're going to create new egalitarianism, and we're going to allow women to have leadership again, like it was in the beginning. Against blatant hatred and greed in this country, we push to an end of slavery. In some of our lifetimes, we've seen the environmental crisis, and Christians have responded best they can. Through the simple and thorough concept of love, we, the people of God's story, have stood up at all times to all tyrants. We've stood up to all the lies, to all the evil. And we've stood up with the same better truth, a more loving vision, a holy sensibility. And we will keep standing up. It's also important at a time like this, if we keep standing up, we need each other. We need to support each other. We cannot expect to win every battle, even when we are so right that it hurts our bones to know why the rest of the world can't see it. As long as we choose love, we stand against the forces of cruelty, and we do not stand alone. We stand with Jesus, who's walked the path before us. We stand with the Spirit of righteousness that comes along beside us, and we stand with a God of peace and justice who looks at a vision ahead of us. We stand for love, we choose love, and God would have it no other way. Amen.